Hello, friends. This is Dr. Richard Ruling here to welcome you to a new series of podcast series on biblical end times. The high rewards for being ready, serious loss if we aren't. And this one is titled How 7 Signs and 7 Timelines Point to Next Spring, that's 2024, for end times to begin. We'll start first with the classic statement by Peter, St. Peter, sometimes referred to, in his book 2 Peter 3:7-10, where he was talking about the day of judgment. And he said, Beloved, be not ignorant, 1,000 years are like a day is like 1,000 years. God is not slack, the day of the Lord will come. The day of the Lord really is not when he comes in the sky visibly, but an end time period of judgment that some Christians, maybe perhaps half, think they're going to be snatched to heaven so they avoid the tribulation or bad times. There's the other half of Christians who think they're going to live through those bad times and be taken to heaven at the end. Actually, both are wrong. There's a compromise. Not snatched to heaven, but something is going to happen at the beginning that's going to be serious for us, and it involves a marriage relationship possibility. Just as God judged Egypt and took Israel to a covenant that made them his kingdom, and later he said, I am married to you, return to me. Well, we can be part of a marriage relationship and a covenant and kingdom if we are ready for what's coming this spring. And so here are the signs and the timelines that point to it. The first is the fact that God gave the world 6 days. And when he gave his Israel the 10 commandments, the fourth commandment is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you can labor, do all your work, but the seventh is the Sabbath of the Lord. And he's giving us, if a day is like 1,000 years, 6,000 years we have here for existence before the biblical end times come. And the point is that if you follow the Jubilees, the text based on that was 2 Peter 3:7-10. But the Jubilees, which are described in Leviticus, the 25th chapter, involve 7 weeks of years, 49, and then the 50th is a Jubilee year. The original Jubilee was in Egypt when God executed judgment on Egypt and took Israel to the covenant that made them his kingdom. But after that, they came after 7 weeks of years. The years were formatted in weeks just like the days were. So they reinforced the same idea. And just like Pentecost is the 50th day, Jubilee is the 50th year after 7 weeks of years. So we're going to look at the Jubilees. The best known time prophecy in the Bible is Daniel 9, verse 24-25, pointing to the Messiah. It was 70 weeks of years. And the Messiah was coming in 69 weeks. Actually, and sadly, the Jews didn't count the sevens. So they missed their Messiah. And in the following verse, verse 26, Jerusalem was destroyed. Well, the Jews acknowledged that Jerusalem was destroyed, 70 A.D. by Titus, but they will still not acknowledge that Christ was the Messiah that came first. Sad difficulty for them. Failure to read also their prophet Isaiah in the 53rd chapter that described a coming as the Lamb of God who bore our sins. So basically that was a problem for the Jews, but they'll have another opportunity to get it right. But the Jews that are in Israel today are really not spiritual. They're just there for free land from the UN. But it wasn't the UN's land to give. It was God's land. He made a covenant with Abraham to give Abraham that land between the river Egypt and the river Euphrates for Abraham's seed. And Paul says in Galatians 3:29, if you're Abraham's seed, if you are Christ, you're Abraham's seed. So basically Christians are entitled to that land as well as Jews. But right now, the group that's there in Israel don't care about Christians, don't care about Muslims, don't care about Palestinians. It's just us only. We're entitled. Well, I think they're going to be in for a sad surprise when Muslims do take the city. That's foretold really in their um, Zechariah, the prophet, last chapter 14. Day of the Lord comes, and I'm seeing that that's an extension of night of the Lord in Egypt when God said he executed judgment and he called it the night of the Lord. As day follows night, so will the end time period be similar in that extent, a time of judgment. So we see that uh, the day of the Lord comes in the context of Muslims taking the city, and they will celebrate their mosque and Quran, which says Allah has no son, but suddenly the Lord will roar from Jerusalem, the heavens and earth will shake, and they will flee. They will realize they don't belong there either. And so that earthquake that shakes heavens and earth is also the knock for the wedding for Christians. That's in Luke 12:36. Be ready when I come and knock, that you open immediately. The only other place where Christ knocks is Revelation 3:20 for a lukewarm church that ended in an earthquake in 63 A.D. Laodicea. Laos means people. Decea means decree, or judging the people, actually, decree. So that we can see an earthquake is pivotal. It's obscured by the fact that it's encoded as a lion's roar. The Lord will roar. He's the Lion of Judah, and it's also encoded as a knock. He will knock for us, and the ancient church where he knocked ended in an earthquake. Well, those are just signs that we can look for in the near future as being huge, because the whole earth will shake and people will know that things are different now. Time of judgment. So we have 1,000 years like a day is one timeline. The jubilees of 50 jubilees, 10 jubilees in Daniel 9 of 70 weeks. 70 times 7 is 490. You'd think it should be 500 because they were 50 years apart, but really not. 50 was number 1 of the next week. So if 50 becomes week 1, also, then it's 49 years. 10 times 49 is 490 years. So that helps us understand that timeline. And it ended in 34 AD with a sabbatical year. The Jubilee would have been 35 AD if Christ had been received as Messiah. It would have been huge also. But fast forward, because Jubilee was usually the 50th year. If you go to the 50th Jubilee, it would be 50 times 49. It would end up not in 35 AD, but in 1995, when Pope John Paul went to the UN on the Day of Atonement, the day to proclaim Jubilee. And then there was a 20-year gap till Pope Francis also went to the UN, also on the Day of Atonement, of all things. How is that so significant? We said that 1,000 years is like a day, and don't be ignorant about that, but how would we know when it was over, except that the Jubilees and then a 20-year gap fit perfectly, because 490 and 490 more, 10 Jubilees and 10 more make 20, but they finish 20 years shy of the 1,000 years, but the 20-year gap from 1995 to 2015 meant that the 6,000 years ended in 2015, and there were a cluster of signs then. The sun will be darkened and the moon turned to blood before the day of the Lord. The Hebrew word for before is panim, means face or facing the day of the Lord. And so that it is really a significant sign when the sun was darkened and the moon turned to blood on Passover in the spring of 2015. Then those were two signs. The day of the Lord also comes as a thief in the night when they're saying peace and safety, and that was the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. And then the Pope came to Congress in, it was, Christ said, standing in the holy place. The ark was in the temple in the holy place, but that's where the law was. Law was kept, but the Pope came to where the laws were made. So it was a similar situation. Laws kept in the temple, in a holy place, but the Pope came to where the laws were made. Also, the abomination spoken of by Christ, standing where it ought not, was the new definition of marriage, described as an abomination in Leviticus 18th chapter, verse 22. Lying mankind with mankind as womankind is an abomination. And yet that was standing in the Supreme Court. So standing where it ought not, Mark 13, verse 14. Early Christians understood Christ's warning to be the Roman army. And we did see Rome and the leadership of CIA and Homeland Security have been traditionally members of Catholic secret societies. And they had a gun grab to see how taking the guns in Texas would go down among people that believed in the Constitution. And so that was also one more sign in 2015 of high significance. The movie San Andreas was released, and I believe that the earthquake that shakes heaven and earth will destabilize the San Andreas fault, and we will see huge calamity in Southern California, maybe northern as well, because that San Andreas fault stretches from San Francisco, which was destroyed in 1905, all the way down to the LA area. And as Muslims say, Hollywood has exported every kind of sin to the world. We are the great Satan, they believe. Well, Christians are not really in charge of Hollywood, but yes, there will be punishment there. So that's it on the 7 signs that I've just enumerated, and the timelines of 1,000 years, 50 years of Jubilee, 7 years of the 7 signs were a 7-year warning, like Joseph's 7 years to Pharaoh in Egypt, when he told Pharaoh in Genesis 41st chapter, there's going to be 7 years of plenty of food and then 7 of famine. And so those 7 years, I think, we've had 7 good years with mostly with Trump, but we still have plenty to eat, even with Biden, but famine is coming and trouble. So that's it for the 7 signs. Other timelines, though. The book of Joel has 5 references to Day of the Lord, and it comes in the context of 4 generations in the first chapter. It says, you tell your children, let them tell their children, and them another generation, 4. Those 4 generations span 40 years per generation in Hebrews 3, 9, and 10. God bore the rebellious generation in the wilderness 40 years. So 4 times 40 is 160. And 160 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln made an Emancipation Proclamation that gave full equality to black people as well as white. They were freed from servitude and bondage, slavery, and we became a great nation. But the text in Joel 1, verse 3 and 4 suggests that we're not doing so well. We're losing what we had. What the cankworm left, the palmer worm eats. What the palmer worm eats, the caterpillar eats. And locusts, 4 types of insects, and nothing left after they've eaten what they each had their fill of. So as far as racial equality, racial hatred is on the rise. And sadly for that, it's not Christian, but it is a fact that is being promoted to split and divide America, so that the answer to the New World Order people is UN, peacekeepers, etc. That's their answer to the fact that America couldn't keep the peace right. Well, they're fomenting hatred and that violence, actually. So it's coming, but so we have the timelines then of 1,000 years, Jubilees, the 7 years of Joseph's warning for Egypt, the 40 years for 4 generations, 160. Another timeline is that just as Egypt enslaved Israel and threw their babies in the river, America has enslaved most people in alcohol, tobacco, drugs. Even medical care is a form of bondage if you have to pay a doctor every month for prescriptions and lab tests and things like that, and those are risky. And we've thrown 63 million babies in the trash can, worse than Egypt. more deserving of Egypt, and so on. And there's one more timeline that I want to explain now. It's the biblical calendar is really different than the papal Catholic Gregorian calendar that we follow mostly, because those calendars are more about their heathen gods and Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, July and August, etc. God's timeline made more sense with a new month each new year, new moon. When the new moon meant the new month, they would see it, they'd blow the trumpet. But right now, with the Catholic calendar, the new moons have no relationship to a new month. January, February, March, it can happen in the middle of the month, early in the month or late in the month. New moons had no relationship. But I think God, in order to warn people, marked the Gregorian calendar as well. If you were to Google the dark day, it tells you that there was an unexplainably dark day on May 19, 1780 in New England. And the sun, midday, it was not just an eclipse that passed away in a few minutes. It went dark and cattle came in from the fields. Chickens went to roost. People needed a lamp to read at noontime. It was unexplainably dark, but they said, well, it's a sign of Christ coming in Joel 2, verse 2, a day of darkness. Well, surprise, it was repeated 200 years later when Mount St. Helens erupted, and it erupted with ash into the sky, and wind carried the ash overnight to darken 3 states in the Northwest. So that amazingly, May 19 and 1780 repeated on May 19, 1980. I think God was marking May 19, and this coming spring, it has a unique timing. Not this year, not any time in the past 5 years, not any time in the future 20 years, but next year it does. How is that? Because May 19 will be the same day that Noah entered the ark, and when people refused his invitation to be saved, they made their own choice to be sacrificed. God isn't arbitrary. He wants to warn everybody, and he will spare those that heed his warning, as he did with Noah. But the world lost a lot of people, millions at that time, because they were they thought Noah was crazy. Well, some of the things that come in the future will seem crazy too, but they'll test whether we really love God and understand that he's true, he knows what he's talking about, his word can be based on, that we can trust our lives to. So that's it in a nutshell. And I just say, hey, get ready. And if we see Jerusalem being compassed with armies in the spring, that's Christ's sign in Luke 21:20. And better be serious, but I would say don't wait till then, because wait and see requires no faith. It's a foolish virgin response. If you know the parable of the wise and foolish virgins in Matthew 25, the foolish did not get into the wedding. They weren't part of it. And I believe that we need to do all we can to share the truth and light and tell people about this podcast. Help them to understand what may be coming. And in Matthew 22, the king makes a marriage for his son and bids his servants. Are we his servants? Do we really serve God? Or are we doing our own thing? He sends them to bid people to a wedding feast. I have the wedding feast. I know what it is and how we can make it. And stay tuned. Tune in next time. Thank you for watching this. May God bless you, and we'll see you again sometime soon, hopefully on the weekend like this is. Bye.